right? So Jayland Walker, this week, I believe, marks the 1 year anniversary of his death. So the Akron protesters swarm into Washington D.C. protesting and call for a federal probe in the Jayland Walker case. Pamela Walker handed a letter to a U.S. Department of Justice representative asking for a federal investigation into the patterns and practices of the Akron Police Department on Tuesday, 1 year to the date that her son was killed by 8 officers. Are you familiar with the Jayland Walker, or should I just read a quick background, Judge?
I know what you're talking about, but you can read the background. But remember, these are headline cases. They are also routine cases.
Mm-hmm.
Now, go ahead and read.
Okay. So the background, it says at approximately 2:30 a.m. on June 26, 2022, a New Franklin police officer attempted to pull over a vehicle owned by Walker because the car had a broken tail light and a missing license plate bulb. The driver failed to stop and drove at speeds approaching 50 miles per hour on city streets before crossing the Akron city line into Coventry Township, at which point the pursuing officer ended the less than 3-minute chase. The incident, according to the Akron Police Department, 12:30 a.m. June 27, 2022, police in Akron, Ohio attempted to stop Walker for a traffic violation on unspecified equipment failure. Walker did not stop and a chase ensued. According to pursuing officers, gunfire came from the vehicle less than a minute into the chase. After several minutes, Walker exited the highway and the chase continued along city streets. Eventually, Walker's car slowed down, and while the car was still moving, Walker, wearing a ski mask, exited from the passenger side and ran towards a nearby parking lot. Officer chased Walker and attempted to stop him with a stun gun, but were not successful. After about 10 seconds of chasing Walker, 8 police officers opened fire for 6 or 7 seconds, shooting approximately 90 rounds. Police said it appeared Walker was turning towards them, and they believe he was armed and moving into a firing position. Following the shooting, Walker was put in handcuffs by police and was found with his hands cuffed behind his back when EMTs arrived on the scene. According to police, officers attempted to administrate first aid to Walker after he was shot. Walker was pronounced dead at the scene. No firearm was found on Walker's body. The Summit County Medical Examiner's Office has ruled death a homicide. July 15, 2022, the medical examiner released autopsy results. Walker's body was hit with 46 bullets in total, and a toxicology report showed that no drugs or alcohol were present in his system. But how do you apply CPR, administrate CPR if he's handcuffed with his hands in the back? I don't understand that. So now the family they protested in DC yesterday and presented a letter to a representative at the Justice Department asking for a federal probe. You can unmute, Judge, because you're muted.
I know. Let me ask you a question. How much of what they allege factually is true? Did he, in fact, flee, run? Did he bail out with a ski mask on?
It was video that showed him exiting a car
with a ski mask on.
Yeah, but
was there a gunshot, in fact, fired while the chase was going on?
Right. So that's the thing. So,
well, then why did you run? Why did you fire the shot? That's just an allegation. But what do you expect these guys to do? They're not being war heroes. This is their day-to-day job from which they retire after 30 years. They want to get home and see their children. And the point of the exercise is there is a growing trend, which is unfortunate, to assume that criminality is normal. It's not. So, I have had clients that have fled from quite a few felonies and they've gotten away. But also, I've also had some family and other people who got real upset when the police didn't stop someone and the person they failed to apprehend wound up killing one of their loved ones later on. See, there are always two sides of these things. So rather than getting triggered, see what the devil it's about.
Yeah, it's two sides to it. And I think the family wants the federal Justice Department to investigate it because yeah, so why did he leave? But he did exit the car. It was no gun found. So why the excessive force?
Well, you don't know it. See, here's the thing. Somebody points a pistol, rifle, shotgun at you. It takes about 1/8 of an inch and maybe anywhere from 2 to 6, 8 pounds of pressure to kill you. And it's dark. You can't see it. You're suffering from tunnel vision. Somebody has just shot at you and they refuse to surrender. And they're doing what they call making furtive movements, like motions that you can't see clearly, but you might be reasonable in interpreting as indicating somebody is going to fire at you again. Did a gun get thrown out of the car? Sometimes that happens. I've had clients over the years tell me, yeah, man, I had a 38, man. I was sweating bullets, man, for days, but they didn't find it because the damn thing went down the drain, the sewer, man. You know, yeah, but so you may have had an armed person, but you see, here's the other thing too. We are doing two things that are incompatible with each other. On the Second Amendment, we're supposed to be able to be armed and have second offense privileges, and not privileges, but rights, which include self-defense if you're a good citizen. But people don't want you to be armed, but the police have no duty to protect you. So the police don't have to protect you unless you're in their custody. So how is something to happen? Now, people don't want to be murdered. People don't want to be held up at gunpoint. People don't want to have to worry about drive-bys, but yet the same people will holler and scream because these other individuals who have chosen to work this kind of task, which is, it ain't the easiest job in the world. And sometimes things happen and people get all upset when somebody's on the ground. We just had one around here not long ago. A guy had held up 3 or 4 places at gunpoint. He and a co-defendant were fleeing from an armed robbery. They got busted up. They turned around, fired 2 shots, and he got gunned down. And his mama was screaming about why they have to kill my baby. He was running away. Why didn't they let him go? Well, somebody else's mama would have been crying if this guy had shot somebody else who happened to be her son.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think because they're saying that he shot at the police when he was exiting the car, and I'm gonna come to you next, Commander. But there was no gun on him. There was no gun found around that parameter because I'm pretty sure they did a search. So if it was no gun, how can you say that he fired a shot?
Well, okay. You can't prove a negative. In other words, there was no gun, but that doesn't mean there was not one. But he's not around. So somebody exercised his prosecutorial discretion, which is practically absolute, and said, we're not going to prosecute these officers.
Now, maybe that's why they want the federal government to step in and investigate.
But then again, what's the federal government going to do? Was the reason they killed him because he was being thuggish or just because he was black? If it was black, then that becomes violation of somebody's civil rights, which is a federal crime, but the feds don't investigate state crime.
Right. I wouldn't even say that it's because he was black. This is not a race issue. I would go with this case that this was excessive force. You shot him and he wasn't armed. Well, whether he was black or not. Go ahead, Commander. You can unmute.
Hey, thank you, Dana. What's up, honorable judge, and thank you for allowing me to speak. One of the things I'm looking at and observing is the fleeing felon law, or the policy that was implemented from when a person is in the act of a crime, and if they're running away, an officer cannot shoot a suspect in their back. I think that is it's laws on the books that exercise those things.
That's
So
not the law. That's not the law.
then what is the aspect that I
What the
that I
law
refer?
is if somebody is in the active commission of a felony that has in fact occurred, they have an obligation at that point to keep that suspect from harming someone else, and they may use deadly force. You don't have to wait until you get a high noon in front of the OK Corral or in front of the Dodge City Saloon. You don't have to be fair about it. You see, somebody turning around and off chance the gun's just lined up by accident, the trigger's pulled, somebody else who is trying to help the public is dead. It does not make any difference whether he's shot in the back, front, side, or whatever, because people spin around, they reflexively dodge this, that, and the other. There are mistakes, and when there's an active shooting situation going on, all bets are off. You can't shoot someone when there is no threat to you. That's true. That's got to do with civilian or cop. And the landmark case comes out of Memphis, Tennessee. I was the public defender at the time when the case came back down from the U.S. Supreme Court. Some kid was running away from a cop. He was climbing a chain link fence. The cop chased him, got to the base of the chain link fence, carefully drew his revolver, and as the kid was stuck, shot him in the back several times. Now, okay, there was no threat to the cop or anybody else. That's a different thing. They didn't say he was guilty of murder. They just said it wasn't appropriate and they could proceed if they chose to do so. Local DA chose not to do so. The dynamics in Memphis in 1978 or 9 were quite a bit different than they are now. So there is that. The other point is when there's an active shootout going on, you see people nowadays, people don't get in fist fights like we used to. You get 18, 19 years old, you've been in a bunch of fights and you understand some things. Time slows down or it speeds up. You get hyper awareness, but most people get tunnel vision. All they see is straight ahead. They miss a lot of details. There are things that are going on. People are hyped up with this adrenaline flow. Some people, their knees are shaking because they're scared, but they have the personal courage to keep doing what they're doing. This ain't the movies. You get put for that long sleep if you call it wrong. So a lot of these people who are shooting back or engaged in it, they may have families, loved ones, children that they're obligated to take care of, grandchildren they want to see, or wife who's sick or something, or whatever it may be. So, this ain't about movie heroics. This is my day-to-day job. I don't do a tour over here in Afghanistan and get sent home at the end of the year. I am home. See, and I may have on Kevlar, but it doesn't cover the sides, anything from the belly button down. My stuff's hanging out. It might get shot off. Bullet hit me in the throat, in the head, face, and I'm done. So you see, when you get in a situation like that, if you're not trying to get away, stop. Hell, due process. And this thing, I was scared. There's much to be said for not being a coward.
Yeah,
Okay.
I was just implying, Judge, that from based off that the individual, I'm implying that the individual wasn't shooting back and he didn't have a gun, and they shot this man in the back. That's why I was implying and bringing up that policy or that legislation, because that's how I observe it to be. I'm not a legal professional by any means, but I am concerned as a Negro Black man that our lives are not being valued in society, and that we're being targeted on in, like any levels of society. Like if you have people arming children to take us out, like and other things, like it's just hard for us, so that's the reason why I was just bringing that up, and just to get more clarity and understanding, because how it was taught to me in class is that like if you have a suspect, you can't shoot them in the back. That's against the law. So like that's all I was just
No, you can't do that. Shoot them in the back just because they are a suspect. But the allegation is there's gunfire. We don't know. Those cops aren't on trial to prove that. And if anything, the state would have to prove it. But that's the way the story goes. And see, there's this other thing inherent in that humans are humans, and nobody's perfect. Nobody's accurate completely in recall. Nobody. So you have things like, if the defendant finds himself in a position where he is in jeopardy and becomes apprehensive thereof, that he may suffer death or serious bodily injury or mortal bodily injury or whatever it may be, he may use self-defense, even the use of deadly force and taking the life of another, so long as, depending upon the state, it's an honest belief or it's a belief that he is sincere in holding. And a lot of states put in, even if he's mistaken as to the totality of the circumstances, so long as it's an honest mistake. They have a concept called furtive movement, which means you don't have to wait for somebody to pull the gun and pull the trigger on you and go bang before you can stop what happens. If he makes a furtive movement, like quickly going under a coat or a garment as though to secure a weapon to use, you don't have to wait for him to pull it. You can take him out. And there's a lot of older language when someone is in the cast of a bullet. In other words, he's within range of a firearm that may be in his possession or in somebody else's possession. You don't have to wait to get shot or do, like, remember the old Gunsmoke? Marshall Dillon faces down the bad man who draws and fires first. Dillon comes in second, but Dillon doesn't miss and take him. You don't have to do that.
Mm-hmm.
What Dillon could have done, to give you, using that example, since a lot of people have seen it, what Dillon could have done, he could have said, "You're under arrest, surrender." And when the guy posed as though he was going to draw, Dillon should have had his gun out and shot him right there. You can do it.
Wait, Commander, I want to go to another. Wait, hold on.
I was just going to just say thank you for clarifying that, because I was kind of misspoken. So I want to say thank you for the education on that, so I won't fall victim to that, in peace.
Yeah, thank you. Good question, though. Good question.
I want to go to 679.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
First and foremost, thank you, Dana, for allowing me to come on your platform and speak. Peace and love to everybody in the room. And lastly, this is directed at Judge Joe Brown. Peace, Judge Joe Brown. I got a lot of respect for you. I've been watching you since I was a youngster, and it's crazy to be speaking to you or asking you this question. So,
thank you.
Carlishia Hood. I'm not sure if I came in the room late. I hear y'all talk about officers and self-defense. In Chicago, I'm pretty sure everybody's familiar with what happened with Carlishia Hood and a 14-year-old son. I'm confused because the way they wrote it, Judge, it was like the boy shot the man and then he was running away. So I'm saying to myself, like you just so eloquently said, you can't shoot somebody when they're no longer a threat. But then we get the news that she got all the charges dropped. So I'm confused, Judge. Maybe you can share some better insight. Maybe you have a better perspective of what happened, but I really don't understand how the charges were dropped.
Go to your state's attorney, Ms. Foxx, and ask her what the hell she's up to. Juicy Jesse. The detectives had an ironclad case on him. She withdrew from the case, met up with his parents, had dinner and lunch with them quite a few times, then interjects herself back into the process and says, it wasn't a crime of violence. Yes, it was. And she drops all charges. Now, he winds up getting convicted later, so same thing. That's your Foxx there, your state's attorney, who is responsible for that. So, yes, the man withdrew. He was fleeing away. At that point, he had abandoned the combat. Why is it that the 14-year-old boy had access to the pistol? Why is it that the mother is allowed to get away with reporting, I told him to go get the gun? And when he gets the gun, he turns around and he shoots somebody running away who is abandoned the combat. It's not like this is a...
What happened? Oh, somebody's probably trying to call him. Can you hear me?
Somebody tried to call me. I hear you.
Well, Mark, you just came up, and I want speakers, when you want to speak, please raise your hand so I know that you want to speak. Go ahead, 679.
No, so the judge I think you answered my question, Judge. So that he should not have gotten away with that then, right? Because he abandoned it. That's what I initially thought, that he was running away. So the threat was neutralized.
Yeah. In other words, the charge to the jury in Tennessee would be, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, if you find that the assailant that provoked this abandoned all attempt and was attempting to desist or withdraw, then the right of self-defense or the right of defense of self or others evaporates.
Yes, sir. You answered it. That's what I thought. But I'm anxious. I'm anxious to see how it all turns out. And I remember, Foxx, when all that happened with Jussie Smollett, and I remember shaking my head like, wow. And it's the same thing with this.
Same thing.
It is. Thank you, Judge.
Well, if the charges are dropped, I think that's the end of it.
Well,
right?
Maybe the grand jury could independently decide to say, okay, we're going to return a presentment. We're going to act on our own and not worry about an indictment. And we might return a presentment, which means the person has to stand trial.
Mm-hmm. I want to go to Liam, then Commander, then I'm going to move on to the China topic. And anybody else want to request to come up, please do so. And also, most importantly, donate to Judge Joe Brown campaign, Cash App, $ Judge Joe Brown 2023. I'll put the information in a Jumbotron. Go ahead, Liam.
Thank you very much. We've had a lot of law questions. I'd like to ask you about comedy. Judge, are you still going to a lot of stand-up shows? Who's funny these days? And are you watching anything on TV?
There's nothing on TV that strikes my fancy. I usually watch nowadays the History Channel, Smithsonian Channel, or something like that. Comedians. I am becoming acquainted with quite a few. I found out I have a nephew who is a pretty good stand-up comedian. So is a niece of mine. They're grown, but they're funny as the devil. And I have pretty good relations with a place here in Memphis called Chuckles, which has a routine comedy presentation every weekend. So I know some comedians, and we've got quite a few. And there's one thing about a stand-up comedian. Anybody out there who practices law or is in the business of persuading folk, there's something to be said about looking at human nature through the eyes of a stand-up comedian. You might learn something, and also if you adopt some of the methodology, you keep your audience awake and attuned to you, and they go to sleep on the other guy.
Okay. Commander, and Mark, you need to raise your hand. I don't know if you can hear us or if you're having audio problems, but I'll come to you next if you want to speak, but please raise your hand. Go ahead, Commander.
Thank you for allowing me to speak. What got me back on the stage real quick is somebody referred to one of the cases, and one of the things that I observe is I see this witnessing the breakdown of the system and order of instruction on all sides of our family structure. And like as this plane's starting to go down and bust in flames, like, do you think black men should just worry about themselves? Like, there's like I got black men that hit me up and they're asking me like, yo, like they're not even respecting the authority or respecting the position of strength or for us to aid them. And this is what some of these brothers are saying, and it's kind of, and I don't have any rebut or response to it, because like I want to be in support of my community, you know, but like I also see the writing on the wall where I might not be respected or valued, and that's it. I feel like that's a dangerous time for us.
So what exactly is your question?
I understand
It's just,
what he's doing.
Oh, you understand what he's saying? Go ahead.
Yeah, let me give you a comment, son. Is this: everywhere in the world, every single continent that is inhabited by humans, except North America, in certain places in North America, the first order of business for any human habitation or settlement is to set up a system of rules. The John Wick franchise says that often. It says, without rules, we are the animals. They say it over and over again. Consequences, over and over again. There are consequences to your actions. And for some reason, in our communities, we seem to be the only community on the planet that gets reported as being against fundamental order and public peace where we live. And there is an insulting presumption that is put out, well, not presumption, but assertion put out that would indicate that for us, being unlawful, unruly, and disorderly and out of control is somehow or another normal. It's not. So you are to be commended because
Somebody probably called him.
you are to
Okay.
be commended because you have taken it upon yourself to commit your career to protecting the public. That's called altruism. Humans have always applauded and held up heroes. In other words, those who were willing to make a sacrifice for the good of the many. Thank you for doing that. Somebody's got to do the job. It's often thankless, but it's there because that's part of being human. Altruism, being willing to sacrifice for the good of the many. So thank you. But it's a rough road. It is a very rough road.
Mm-hmm. All right. So, Mark, if you want to speak, you need to raise your hand. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So why didn't you raise your hand?
I don't know how to raise my hand.
You see the heart button with the plus, and then if you click on that, you'll see a hand, and then you just tap that. Yeah, there you go. Go ahead, Mark. It's your turn.
I just want to speak about that lady. That son shot that guy. I say it was that lady's fault. She should have shut her mouth, but the modern woman don't know how to be quiet and bag up. So she'd rather put her son in danger than swallow her pride and be quiet, get her food, and walk out.
That's it?
That's all. Thank you.
Interesting comment.
It's very interesting.
As I tell people all the time, what the newspapers say is not always what the people say. I repeat what I said earlier. Jury trial, press thinks there's going to be a bloodletting. Somebody ought to get the chair, and the jury wants to know if they got to convict the defendant because the victim deserved killing, in their opinion.
Well, the guy who was pounding on a woman, he's a piece of shit. And he has kids. So if he's triggered from a stranger in a Chinese restaurant, said whatever she said, I'm pretty sure that he has probably laid hand on his baby mamas or his kids or any woman he's dated just by his actions. So make no mistake about it. The guy who ended up dying, who was verbally being extra and pounded the mother in the head more than once, he is a piece of shit. The victim here is the 14-year-old because, yeah, you mentioned it when we did the show yesterday. If you have a permit to carry a concealed weapon or whatever, and she had her underage in a car and a gun was in a car and she chose to go into the restaurant, she should have took the gun with her. Why would you leave a gun unattended in the presence of a minor? And then you tell him, I'm allegedly texting him in the process, and he comes in, whether she texts him to come in or he's seen what was going on, maybe she didn't say bring the gun in and shoot him, but text him, I'm arguing with this man, and he gets the gun and comes in and shoot him. Was he taught how to use the gun or something? I don't know. But the victim is the 14-year-old because now he has a body. That's nothing to be proud of. Yes, he was protecting his mother. He probably had, ain't no probably, he had more balls than the men that were in that restaurant that was just standing there and did nothing. So if you want to talk about quote unquote modern women, please have several seats with that type of talking point, because it's not about modern women. It's just the fact that you had a piece of shit of a man arguing with a woman over some funky ass Chinese food. Now, she could have not said nothing because she should have realized he's crazy. But who are you to tell another grown person to shut up? And if you don't, I'm going to fucking pound your head in. What? Oh, so I'm supposed to be quiet? I'm going to be quiet because you're insane. Yeah. But I'm not going to be quiet because you're right. But yeah, sometimes it's better to just walk away from a crazy piece of shit person. And that's what that man was. I'm not going to involve my kid. I'm not going to leave a weapon around a minor kid of mine. So he was a piece of shit. It had nothing to do whether she was a modern or old. That please stop using that talking points, because anybody that uses that talking points, you're very unintelligent. You know, and you don't know what you're talking about. Why was the charges dropped? Well, I mean, you know, definitely. I'm glad that the charges were dropped for the 14-year-old because he is the victim. But this is this.
Let me speak on that. One of my more interesting accomplishments in life is I got the youngest person in the world on a death row, off death row, when I got his conviction for murder set aside unanimously. I got a stay of execution 23 minutes before they were going to execute him, and he had been 15 years old for 2 weeks, and he was in there for homicide committed when he was 13. So it is what it is on that. But right now, we've got a thing here. I spoke at a street peace party, block party. Place is called Tate Street here in Memphis that has had more shootings. There have been more shootings on Tate Street than in any other location or locale in Memphis. So the citizens decided to arm up and patrol the area to stop the violence. They had this block party, and a bunch of 13, 14, 15-year-olds showed up. Several of them had Glocks prominently stuffed down the front of their pants so they were visible. So the armed citizens and myself went over there to talk to the young people, and I think we persuaded them that they would be way overmatched if they decided to cause the trouble that they seemed like they wanted to cause. Now, we've had a rash of felonies committed by 14-year-olds, and I have had quite a few situations in my career where the killer was 13, 14, 15, at least allegedly, and sometimes in reality, whether or not they could prove it. Now, we have to consider these things. But the point I was making is not who is right or wrong. I was merely reciting the technical law. If there is a situation that arises where a person is justified in defending self or a third person with whatever degree of force is appropriate, either physical, non-lethal force, or deadly force or lethal force in certain circumstances, there are some rules. And one of the things is here, 14-year-olds are not supposed to have access to handguns. They're not supposed to go bring one to mama, whether or not there was merit to mama's position. Technically, under the law in most states, if there is an assaultive course of conduct that is occurring that would justify someone in defending themselves or a third person, and that individual ceases and desists that conduct, then all right of self-defense or defense of others evaporates. Now, there is a difference. The conduct defended against, either by self or on behalf of others, has to be an assault upon somebody's person. In other words, a direct physical attack or something that a reasonable person would conclude is about to launch such attack, if you want to justify defense of self or another. Now, if somebody is holding up a store, that's not an assault against an individual per se. That's not a physical blow being struck on someone. That is none of the above. That is something else. And then we have this thing here. He cuffed her about the head, but there is no allegation that he was in danger of rendering death or serious bodily injury to the woman. So all I was...
No, he told her.
Yeah,
he said
he
it.
said I'm going to do what I'm going to do, but he didn't say it.
And he did.
But he didn't say he was going to kill her. See?
He said, I'm going to bash your fucking head.
Well, that may be, but we have to deal with whether or not that was puffing, hyperbole, or whether it was...
No, it wasn't puffing, because he actually did.
But he didn't kill her, did he?
No, because the son came in and defended her.
But he was running. But you see,
now we don't know if he would have kept doing that or not.
Listen to me. I'm not debating the individual circumstances. I'm just telling you what the general law is. It's up to a jury to determine, once they hear the state law and the charge and the facts and the evidence, what the applicability of those code sections is going to be to the individual case in front of them. That's the jury's job under the direction of the court. The jury act as judges of the facts and of the law under the direction of the court. Now, that's what juries do in America. That's what they do in England.
But these charges were
I
dropped.
know that. That's prosecutorial discretion. But considering the Juicy Jesse episode, we are very familiar with that, and it's the same person. Questions
Can I throw this
might
in there
be
too?
asked about what's going on, because it's essentially inconsistent, though it's not outside of her authority to do that.
Can I throw this in there too? Because in this situation, for me, it may be not for everybody, but for me, the victim is the 14-year-old, not the piece of shit, not the loudmouth mama. However, maybe they dropped the charges. I'm saying there wasn't enough. Mute up for a second, because I hear clicking and clacking, and maybe they dropped. Part of the reason of dropping the charges, aside from not enough evidence, because they already have so much black backlash, especially with the Black community, of these illegal immigrants coming into flooding Chicago and millions of dollars going to programs for the illegals. And if I lock up this Black mother and this 14-year-old Black boy, right, and I'm giving free housing, healthcare, education, and stipends and food stamps to illegals that are not fucking citizens and ain't doing shit for the Black community, that's a lot of people careers, I guess, going up in smoke. That's the Democrat Party basically going up in smoke. And Chicago, of course, does play a strong political hold when it comes to the state and, dealing with the White House or whatever. So maybe it was, okay, legally, not enough evidence, blah, blah, blah. But also unwritten or unseen of, this is bad optics, so let's not bring charges up.
It may well be, but remember, people act consistently with their character, and this is the exact same individual responsible for the Juicy Jesse situation.
Yeah, because they wanted.
And remember, they had to bring in a special outside prosecutor.
Right, because the whole narrative with the Juicy Jesse, it was the Trump supporters put a rope around my neck, right? To paint that narrative, i.e. again, for optics, for this political drama, because this was, I believe, during the presidency, before the election and everything like that. So, and then you have that quagmire. And then again, fast forward to this past weekend with this, they already know they're going to lose the presidency this next year. They're trying to hold on to the House and the Senate. So we need Chicago Democratic voters.
The Senate. They don't have the House right now.
Damn, that's right. They don't even have the House, but maybe they're trying to get the House back. Or yeah, definitely hold on to the Senate. So yeah, I think this is more political and less legal. And going back to what you were saying, considering this is goddamn it Chicago and the Juicy Jesse quagmire, that's just how they get down.
The whole Bill of Rights and a lot of the history of English and U.S. law, writ of habeas corpus, is to take politics out of justice. And all things considered, it's done a pretty good job, but the worst scenario is to get somebody in charge who doesn't get it and says, we're going to take advantage of this opportunity to impose our worldview on everybody, and we'll make it criminal. I posed that to you about in the other big city, the one that's right above Chicago in size, New York, where Bragg indicts Trump for supposedly bribing Stormy Daniels to keep certain embarrassing things quiet. Well, everybody's going, oh yeah, blah, blah, blah. It's Trump, get him, rah, rah, rah. But you see, as I'm fond of saying, most of our rights are articulated in the names of people that are not good people. 1963, you have a right to remain silent. Anything you say can and may be used in evidence against you, etc., etc. That was articulated in the name of Miranda, who was not a good person. But let's get away from Trump. Let's look at the other side that we tend to get away from when we deal with politics. If you have to pay someone so they do not embarrass you, flip the script. What's that called? That's blackmail. So essentially, New York's Bragg indicted the victim of felony blackmail. You get into the thing about, well, the corporation didn't fully report what the settlement to or what the payout to Stormy Daniels was. Well, that's public record. And American civil law encourages settlements. So somebody settles it. There's a gag requirement. In other words, you're not to discuss it. But if you put the specifics in the corporate report, then you have published what the conditions of the settlement are, which is supposed to be kept confidential. So you violated a court order. So again, something got indicted. Somebody, the fictitious corporate entity, got indicted because it followed the law. Now, that's the trend we're getting, which is way back to square one, 240 some years ago. The power of the U.S. government is being used for oppression and not restricted in terms of its reach, which is why we have the Bill of Rights ratified in 1791.
Come in.
Don't judge him, Joe Brown.